Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city, so I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, where we sort of resume the regular season rhythm. I say sort of because we're interrupting our season previews of Big Ten teams because Michigan State has an unusually early exhibition game, and they just got a commitment from a top 75 player for the 2025-26 team. So before we begin, a big thanks to Ben Vanderveen, who gave a very generous donation to the show via PayPal, and from Steve Schultz via Venmo. Thanks, guys. We really appreciate the support of what we're doing here at TIFNOTS. If you like what we're doing and would like to send your thanks, head on over to our support page, tffinots.com/support, where you can find ways to send one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or a recurring gift on Substack or Patreon. So let's begin the discussion quickly on the recruitment of Jordan Scott. He committed tonight, or speaking Thursday night. He is the first high school commitment for the Spartans to start shaping this class. And we can briefly review who Scott is. And I think, further discussion on where if this is the first domino commitment from Ward or someone else within the high school ranks.
Well, we'll start with Jordan Scott. So just the basics. As you said, he's a consensus top 75 guy. I've seen him as high as right on the border of being a top 50. Some have him a little bit lower, but consensus top 75. So very much within the wheelhouse of guys that you would typically expect in a Michigan State class. He's 6'7", from South Lakes High School in Virginia, which also happens to be the alma mater of Grant Hill. In fact, I think Grant Hill is the last great basketball player that school has had. Comes from a basketball family. Both his mother and father were high-level players. So good bloodlines. He won a state championship in Virginia last year. Played on the UnderArmor circuit, which is generally considered to be the third of the big three circuits, well behind the Nike circuit and the Adidas circuit, EYBL or Three Stripes League, but still a high-level league. And Michigan State has had guys who played that circuit before. Max Christie was an example of that. I'm trying to think.
Normand was too.
Yeah, Normand, I believe that's accurate. Normand was
Carr?
And no, but I was trying to remember is if Xavier Booker's team was a UAA team or if they were an independent. And I think they might have played on the UAA circuit. But regardless, they've had guys from that circuit before. Jordan Scott, as I said, is 6'7". He's about 185. And the first thing that should tell you is he's probably got some filling out to do.
Yeah, right.
And that seems to be acknowledged if you're, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are also seeing written articles about him, have already seen them or seeing them now that he's committed. And this is something that both his high school and AAU coach have referred to and is fairly obvious when you get a look at him. He needs to add some strength and some bulk. But what you hear those guys say is when he does that, then you're really going to be talking about a player. They love his versatility. I have not been able to find an exact number on his wingspan, but suffice it to say, it's obvious from looking at him, it's plus. And so what we mean by that, I don't know if we talk about this sometimes, but I don't know if we ever really talk about how this is generally measured.
It's like the Da Vinci thing, Da Vinci, the ideal man. He's like, everything's symmetrical. Your height is the same as the length when you put your arms out to the side.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if your wingspan in his case is longer than 6'7", that's considered to be plus, and his is considerably longer. I'm not sure whether it's, that freakish Draymond Green type where you're talking about 7 feet or 7 feet plus, or if it's like 6'10", 6'11", but it's definitely plus. And the feeling is that's going to allow him, along with his intelligence, to become a very good defensive player in time. The other thing you have to like is that with him, we're talking about a wing at that size. And I saw Jim Camperoni made a comment this morning that I assume is informed either by discussions with Michigan State staff or with somebody in Scott's circle, but the belief is that he might not be done growing. Mm-hmm. He definitely, and I don't want to take this stuff too far because you get out over your skis with it, but I think I do think he looks young for his age when you look at him. And so I can, for whatever the nothing that's worth, I can buy the idea that, hey, maybe he's got another inch or two in him. You'll have to see. But even at 6'7", you're still talking, when you're talking about a wing, and we spent some time dealing with this when MSU was in the portal and eventually was able to successfully sign Frankie Fiddler. I think Tom Izzo has found out in recent years, the last couple of years at least, that it can be tough going sometimes when you don't have a legitimate big wing option to turn to.
Uh-huh.
And last year, MSU ran into that problem. Its 3 best perimeter players were, 6'1", 6'4", 6'3". That's okay. It's not like they're all 6'1", but they didn't have that 6'6", 6'7" guy to match up against certain opponents. And also just to give you an advantage when you're playing a team that doesn't have a guy that size. And I think that's what hopefully is one of the things is, foreshadowing a little bit, we're going to be eventually previewing Michigan State in detail. And that's one of the things of having Frankie Fiddler on the roster, I think is going to be a difference maker for this year's team versus the last couple. That's the hope, at least. Well, we're talking about another guy in that size range with Scott. And you watch him play. There are lots of clips out there. You can see it for yourself. You see him, even without optimal strength, he's still able to use his size in mismatch situations, which I like. That he's already doing that to some extent at the level he's playing currently. And you would think that's only going to improve as he gets older, as he gets physically stronger, all of that. They also love his potential as a shooter. His AAU season this spring was a little inconsistent with the three-point shot. I think he was right around the mid-30s from three, if I remember correctly. But his reputation is better than that. So they definitely believe this is a guy who can be an effective long-range shooter for them. And one other thing, I was reading some quotes from his AAU coach this evening before we started recording. That guy said he played every position for them this spring, 1 through 5.
Wow.
And obviously he's never going to be 5, God help us, at this level. and honestly, probably never a 4 either, unless he really does have another growth spurt in him, and then maybe you could think about it. But the idea that there's at least a thought that he's good enough, and I'm not talking about, he could be a point guard down the line, but boy, that's really helpful if you've got a 6'7" guy who you feel comfortable with putting the ball in his hands, letting him make some decisions. It opens some things up. For example, It opens up the ability to use him potentially in pick and roll situations where you want to go away from just strictly having your point guard initiating those. It's helpful if you've got a wing that you trust in those spots. That's something that Michigan State had last year with Tyson Walker. They're trying to get Jaden Akins to that spot now for this season. We'll see how that goes. But if Jordan Scott really does have that level of ball skill versatility, that's another thing that could be really important. Before we wrap it up with him, I just want to say there's been, in my observation, a noisy minority, and very much a minority, who has talked about Scott for a long time as a plan B or a plan C. That was never the case. And I'm saying that based on two things. One is based on things I was told they've much earlier than now, months and months and months ago, that even though they had all these guys, highly rated guys, many of them more highly rated than he is at that position, that if he was ready to commit, Michigan State was going to accept the commitment. And the other thing that tells you that is they've recruited him hard and consistently for 2+ years. This was not a Cohen Carr or Garrett Norman recruitment where they got in late because maybe some other guys they didn't get. And no, they have been on him. And when I say hard, I mean, and consistently, I mean Izzo making multiple visits over the last 2 years to his high school and to his home. So it's not even just he's showing up in a lot of games. It's the full deal. That is how they have recruited him. And so those two things ought to tell you how they viewed Scott. Now, there are unknowns in this. If they had Jalen Harrelson and Darius Adams ready to commit to Michigan State 3 weeks ago, would they have taken those commitments and not waited on Scott? Yeah, probably. I would believe that, but I never believed that there was this pecking order that some people, again, we're talking about a minority, but a noisy, that some people believed existed. I don't think that. My own personal opinion, for what it's worth, and I don't recall if we've gotten into it here. I've gotten into this elsewhere. My belief is there's one guy, by the way, someone who is, at least for now, is still on the board. He hasn't committed anywhere. There is one player among all the guys in this class they've recruited that I believe has the potential to be an immediate difference maker as a true freshman. And that's Dwayne Aristo, the kid from the Netherlands, who's a very well put together physically wing, great athlete, very skilled. That's a guy that I think could potentially step in and be, a number 1 or a number 2 option as a freshman on a very good team. I don't believe that about anybody else. And you can talk about where Jalen Harrelson and Trey McKinney are ranked. I don't believe they are that level of player. I just don't. And so to me, there wasn't much of a difference between any of the wings they were recruiting in terms of what I would expect from them early on. And here's the other thing, and again, I'm not trying to sunshine this, but it is something that occurs to me. While I believe that's true about guys like Harrelson and McKinney in particular, since they're both basically consensus top 20 guys, but I don't think will play the way top 20 guy people expect a top 20 guy to play. That puts a lot of pressure on the program to retain them if they don't do that as a freshman. It also might not stop them from going pro anyway. And it is possible that a guy like Jordan Scott, you get more out of him, even though the start might be a little bit slower. I do think the one bit of difference here is that with Harrelson and McKinney in particular, those two guys physically could play college basketball right now. I don't believe that about Scott. I think he's got some physical development to undergo before he's there. So might it be true that you would get more out of those guys as freshmen than you will Scott? Yeah, quite possibly. But I don't know how much it matters, because if you're not talking about a guy who's going to be an immediate, major impact guy as a freshman, well, we're kind of talking about differences at the margins anyway.
Yeah, depth plus.
Yeah. So I love this addition. He seems, everything I've heard, and I watched his commitment tonight. 24/7 had it live on YouTube, but I watched it, and all the things that I have been told were there on full display. This is a very sharp, bright, poised kid. And I like having kids like that in the program. I think that's something that Tom Izzo likes, those kind of guys. Obviously, he likes guys who win basketball games too. But it's you feel good having good kids, and everything I've heard is this is a very good kid. And somebody, again, I can't emphasize this enough. When you come from a real basketball family, and he does, I think sometimes that pays some sort of hidden dividends in terms of what you're getting. You know, it's just kind of the same way that neither of his parents were at anything close to the level that Jason Richardson was, but it's part of the reason why I don't lose one bit of sleep about Jace Richardson.
Right.
Not
yeah.
one. You know, that kid is, and we talk to him, so we experience that as well, but he's another example what I'm talking about with Jordan Scott. Like you get the sense, this is a good kid. He's a smart kid. He knows what it's about because he's grown up with it. And I like that element in this recruitment. So speaking for myself, I'm really pleased to see him added to the class.
Yeah, no, and I watched his highlight video, and the kid doesn't miss. I don't know. Right.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, so I guess, the next one everyone's talking about is Ward is the next possible one to commit to.
Yeah.
So as you get this momentum, as a class sort of starts to develop and fall into place, is that kind of what you're reading the tea leaves? And then I guess, what else is out there that you think is going to happen?
He's the next one. And word seems to be breaking over the last couple days that he's going to go to Michigan State. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. He's 6'8", about maybe 215, 220. So not bruiser size, not a 5. But boy, the more you look at him, the more you understand how much there is to like. The thing he's lacking right now, but the good news is he knows it, and I've seen him talking about it, how he knows it's something he's got to develop, is he's not a stretch guy at this stage. Mm-hmm. But everything else about his game screams MSU 4-man. He is tough. He loves to rebound, plays bigger than he is, has versatility. He coming out of the Michigan State official, which happened just this past weekend, he was talking about how the sales pitch Michigan State has given him is that they know what to do with guys like him who can do a lot of different things as a 4-man. And specifically, he was referencing Draymond Green, but, there's other guys who aren't exactly a great comparison physically, like a Jaren Jackson, but, Xavier Tillman, even though he played 5 a lot, I think It still makes sense. Draymond Green in particular, though. So it tells you that they see Cam Ward as a guy who can make plays for other people. They see him as a guy who they think can be a very good defensive player. He can be a rebounding presence. So all those things just scream. And everything you hear about him is there's a toughness and an intensity and a competitiveness to him that I think really fits well with this program. So he was on the periphery for a while. I mean, they didn't just start that recruitment yesterday, but this spring, it really started to turn. For a long time, there's a kid, Nico Bundello, who they're still, he just announced the Final Four today, and Michigan State is one of the 4. He was kind of the leader in the clubhouse for that 4 spot in this class. And then he had a long-term relationship, his family, with Doug Wojcik, a very skilled player. But, I made this point today on the Spartan Mag board, and it's not, I don't mean this to be a knock on him at all, because I think he's got tremendous potential as an offensive player in particular. He's really skilled. He's 6'10". He reminds me of somebody that John Beilein would have been after hard at Michigan. And that you could still be a grimy. John Beilein put plenty of guys in the NBA, so that's not really a slight. Yeah. But stylistically, the more you dive into it, the more I think you feel like Cam Ward is more of an Izzo guy, more of a Michigan State guy, at least traditionally what they've had. And I have to think that part of the reason they really turned the heat up with Ward is that they started to feel that way too.
Mm-hmm.
So the sense seems to be that Cam Ward is going to be the next commitment, possibly the last one from high school ranks in this class. We'll see. He had announced that he was going to make his decision known, I think, on October 30th. But with the way word is getting out now, it seems like maybe that's going to get accelerated. I don't know that, but the suggestion in the recruiting industry and from the Michigan State side of things seems to be that he's going to go to Michigan State as well. And we could talk more about him, I guess, when he commits, but we've already spent some time. So he'd be another great addition. And I think maybe unlike Scott, he's a guy who probably you would look to play some as a freshman, maybe a lot, who knows? Because physically he's ready for it, you know? Other recruits, the only other name that's really out there that I think is still relevant, I mentioned Blondello, technically still there, but I don't think he ends up at MSU. The other three are
Aristotle, right?
Well, I'm going to get to him. No, I'm talking about Blondello's Final Four. The other three besides Michigan State are UConn, Carolina, and Ohio State.
Right.
And it'll be interesting. I've heard all three of those schools. He's from Ohio.
Make cases for him, yeah.
Yeah. It just feels like maybe it's going to end up being Ohio State because I don't know that at the end of the day that UConn or UNC are going to have him as their top choice at that position in the class. So it could be Ohio State by default. I definitely think there's essentially no shot that he ends up at Michigan State. I can't see it now, assuming that Cam Ward, does end up at MSU.
Right.
And honestly, this is not, justification type stuff. My sense is that MSU actually had gotten to the point they preferred Cam Ward.
Yeah.
So the other name that's out there is Aristotle, we just referenced. And look, if that kid wants to come to Michigan State, you take him in a heartbeat. No questions asked. I think he's going to be, as I said, one of the few guys in that class, and this is true around college basketball now. How many true freshmen are really major difference makers anymore? Since the portal era has come into play, we don't see it very much. Now that could partially be, kind of a cycle where the freshman classes haven't been as good.
COVID too.
Yeah,
COVID year.
There's a lot of different, but I do think the fact that you're playing against teams that are generally more loaded up, and it's not even just the experience; it's just and not even really
physically they're different too. Right?
There's that, which is a big thing, but it goes along with what I was going to say, which is even if you're not talking about A+ talent, like for example, you look at Michigan State this year, are there probably several wings who are true freshmen that have more quote unquote talent, by which we mean, some combination of athletic ability, skills, and ceiling potential than Frankie Fiddler? Yeah, absolutely. So are there probably several guys in that freshman class nationally who have better professional horizons than Frankie Fiddler might have? Yes, I'd buy that in a heartbeat. But are they going to be better players this winter than Frankie Fiddler? Probably not very many. Right. And that's true, around college basketball at the high major level, which is where obviously the better freshman recruits end up. So I think it's a number of different things, but you can't argue with the reality the way it's been. And that's why I say, it's one of the reasons why I say, guys like Harrelson and McKinney, Michigan State's not going to get, because one's already committed and the other eliminated Michigan State. I kind of shrugged my shoulders at that. Like, if you get them, fine. Okay. They're not bad players by any means. But if you're talking about building a roster next year that's optimal to be as competitive as it can be next year, there are going to be plenty of guys, multiple guys in the portal that will give you more than those two players will as freshmen. Guaranteed.
Right.
Aristotle is an exception to that. I can see that kid being a 15-point-a-night guy as a freshman. Maybe more. Who knows? I just think he's very, very talented. I also think he's ready to play defensively. So it's the whole thing. Duke is in there, but it doesn't look to me like they're going to get him. And it's tied in with other recruits they have gotten or are expected to get. So I think that's unlikely. The school that you hear most prominently with him is Arizona. And if you know anything about their head coach, Tommy Lloyd, that makes all kinds of sense. Because if you remember, he was an assistant at Gonzaga. He was the guy, not Mark Few. He was the guy who was responsible for establishing that foreign player pipeline. You think about all the guys that Gonzaga's gotten from Canada, from Europe, from all over. That was Tommy Lloyd. And now he's the head coach at Arizona. So I mentioned earlier, Aristotle is a native of the Netherlands. So it's not surprising to me that Lloyd would have been in on him early and that he's probably got a very good shot. He hasn't eliminated Michigan State, and there doesn't seem to be, in my opinion, a ton of good intel as to what's definitely going to happen here. Like you're not getting it telegraphed the way you do with a lot of other recruitments. So I'm not going to say Michigan State has a 0% chance, but you're probably not betting on them at this point. Even though everything I heard is he had a great visit and they've recruited him hard, they've gone about it the right way, and given themselves a chance, they're in it. But if I had a gun to my head, I'd probably pick Arizona. It makes sense for a few different reasons. But if Michigan State can land him, fantastic. If they can't, then I think what that tells you is they're definitely going to be in the portal again next spring, because the idea, again, we don't think Jordan Scott is likely to be ready as a freshman. So to play a big role, I think he can play,
right.
but he's not going to play a big role. So you're going to lose Frankie Fiddler for sure. So
Aikens.
you probably need that kind of player. And if you get Aristotle, well, you got him. But if you don't, then I think that's going to put you in the portal. And I expected Michigan State was probably going to be in the portal for at least a player anyway. The way recruiting has gone, that they might well end up with only 2 high school players instead of 3. It might mean that they go get 2 guys. And it's obviously way too early to know. They could need more than that for all we know when roster season is said and done. But we're not there yet. Just based on what we know now, though, I think at a minimum, well, you could say this, you're going to lose Jaden Akins, Frankie Fiddler, and Zapala. So you're going to lose 3 guys. So at a minimum, you'd probably be needing to have 3 new players. We think they're going to have 2 high school players. That would mean 1 portal guy. But, there could be attrition. You could see Xavier Booker. It would not be crazy for him to be leaving Michigan State to turn pro at the end of the year. We have to see how things go, but that's certainly not, it's a non-zero possibility, right? Yeah. So I can see pretty easily, them looking for 2 guys maybe in the portal, one of which would almost certainly be a wing with some size if they don't get Aristotle. The other guy, I guess, who's out there technically, I don't think Davion Hanna, who's a 6'4" wing from out of Wisconsin, I don't think he's technically cut Michigan State from his list, although I could be wrong about that now. I've honestly stopped paying attention because it doesn't seem like that's one that maybe the tea leaves seem to be saying Alabama from what I understand with him. So that's one that's not going to happen. And then you've had guys, I mentioned Trey McKinney had cut Michigan State from his list. He's down to a Final 3. Michigan State's not one of them. You've had kids like Harrelson and Darius Adams, who I liked a lot. That's, of all the other guys, Darius Adams, I'll just say this, he committed to UConn a week or so ago. That's the one guy out of that list of other guys after Aristotle who I think might be able to get himself into a realm where he's contributing a lot. And that's just because he's so skilled offensively. That's the main reason I don't buy McKinney or Harrelson at that level, because I don't think either one of them is a skilled enough player offensively to do that. I think they're they play hard. They're versatile guys. They'll be able to defend right away, especially McKinney. They could do a lot of things, but I don't see big-time scorer in them, whereas Darius Adams could do that. So all those guys, Chris Sedak, who's a top 10-ish center, just announced a final 7. Michigan State was in his final 12, with, congratulations. They didn't make the cut for the final 7. Not a huge surprise. That always seemed like something of a long shot, but I did hear that Michigan State did get in on him aggressively, and I believe that was a Sadi Washington thing. The kid's from Louisiana. Yeah, I believe he's going to play prep ball in Missouri this year at Link Academy, and I think that's where the Sadi connection came in, because he recruited Terrace Reed out of Link Academy. Sedak was kind of a late riser this spring, kind of came out of maybe not entirely nowhere, but pretty close to it, and now is seen as an elite recruit. So that was always one that you kind of didn't expect was likely to go Michigan State's way, but that's now more or less official. So I think we really are down to, realistically, it's Aristotle is the last real, even semi-realistic option, and I'm not counting on that, but until it's over, it's over.
Right. Well, and certainly, as we've talked about, the portal is, Michigan State is going to be in that market and going to be doing that as, in the future, just like everyone else. The plan, of course, with Izzo and the staff is not to have large changes where you have 5, 6, 7 players you bring in.
That's right.
Yeah, you just fill in the pieces you need.
That could happen if, because you can't ever know. Are you just going to have an exodus from your roster? But you could see the way that they're doing this is not going to be radically different than what it's always been. It's going to be portal additions, yes, but probably at the margins. Meaning I don't mean marginal players. I just mean, 1 or 2 guys. I think that's kind of what we saw this year is kind of the picture going forward. That would be the expectation.
Yeah. And we've seen, Tyson Walker's obviously a good example. Point guard plays problem. We'll go get a transfer out of Northeastern. He ended up not playing point guard, but ultimately it would end up being hook guard. But, that's the sort of thing that you're going to see Michigan State do, obviously. All right. Well, let's talk about the game. And so it's a very unusual situation. Usually Michigan State, so I'll preface this by saying usually Michigan State plays one exhibition game that is open to the public. Now, last year was an exception. They had a closed scrimmage the previous year with Tennessee in Knoxville. But then this year, the sort of home and home, I guess you call it, for scrimmages, it was opened up because of the fire that happened in Maui around for the Maui Invitational, so that they raised money to help victims of the terrible fires in Maui, Hawaii. And so there was actually 2 exhibition games that were televised. So they are having a game this year, which is in Northern Michigan. And this is, of course, the alma mater for Tom Izzo. And so that makes it a little bit different for him. And because the timing is strange in that it's the 13th. It's so early in the year, because the year doesn't begin until November 4th. I think is opening day for college basketball. So there'll be an exhibition game the 29th of October. And then October 13th is this game in Northern Michigan, Superior Dome. They're going to retire Tom Izzo's number. And so not only that, but then also Michigan State had an unusual situation where they had their overseas trip. And so they played exhibition games, which through the magic of the internet now were televised. You could actually watch, streamed. And so we've actually seen Michigan State a lot, and you're going to see them even more. So this is just a weird thing, but it also kind of breaks up our expected pattern for doing all the previews. Now we, of course, had 17 Big Ten teams outside of Michigan State to preview. So we're squeezing all this stuff in. So this kind of interrupts this process, but the point is Michigan State's got a game. And so we're going to talk about this like a regular game. So we're going to talk about Northern Michigan here.
It's also,
to an extent, right?
As much
as
I just wanted to comment
just
to set the stage of this, and then you can kick into the more specific stuff. You mentioned this is an opportunity. Tom Izzo is going to have his number retired, and for those who don't know, which I can't imagine there are many listeners who don't know this, but Tom Izzo was I believe a walk-on initially at Northern Michigan, and he ended up becoming an All-American at that level. So if he poor mouths his ability as a player, look, I understand it's D2, but if you're a D2 All-American, you're still a hell of a basketball player. And so his number is being retired, I think, not just because he's the most famous alum from the school. I believe that's true. But because he was a very, very accomplished player in his playing days in the 70s in Northern Michigan. So it's got to be a huge thrill for him. He apparently didn't know this was in the works. Those who have paid attention know that they surprised him with a video from Steve Mariucci informing him that this, and the world, that this was going to be happening. They're playing it in, I think it's called the Superior Dome.
Yeah, it's the largest wooden indoor dome, I guess, in the world.
Yeah,
well,
which is crazy. But I'll tell you what, after, and, you know, God help all the people on the Gulf Coast in Florida, but after watching footage today of the dome in Tampa getting ripped off from the stadium, you're like, well, maybe wood's a little more solid. I don't know. But yeah, I believe it's where they play football, right?
Yes, they play. That's where they play the football games.
And so it's not typically where basketball games are held, but they're using it obviously because the crowd is well beyond what they would normally have for a basketball game. And so, so it's a big deal. In fact, it's such a big deal. I don't recall whether you mentioned this or not. You mentioned that it's being televised, but specifically, Lisa Byington and Bill Rafferty are doing the game.
Bill Rafferty.
So it's again, there's some gravitas to this, you know. So it's really, I think it's a very, very cool thing all the way around that this is happening. Now, Michigan State's just got to do their part and win comfortably.
Right.
To not turn it into a bummer, but everything else around it is great. And it's another one of these things. Look, say what you want. You can believe Michigan State hasn't won enough national titles. You can believe the last few years have been disappointing, all these things, whatever. In terms of using basketball as a tool, a conduit to producing memories, and I think also exposing players to vastly different kinds of aspects of the world. I'll just describe it generally. There's no program in America who's ever done it any better than this one. And this is another example, that the Upper Peninsula, look, I'm going to guess the vast majority of those guys, I'm thinking of anybody who's played on Michigan State's team in the last 5 years, and I could be wrong about this, but I would be willing to bet that Joey Hauser might be the only one who's ever even been to the UP, and that wouldn't be 100% lock. I'm only saying that because of general proximity.
From Wisconsin, right.
So, and upper Wisconsin, like he wasn't from Milwaukee either. So it wouldn't shock me if he's been to the UP at some point. But other than that, who else? I could be wrong. It's not even like, lots of their guys have probably all been to Lake Michigan. But the UP, that's a different thing. So to get that opportunity to go to this place that they might never have an opportunity or a reason to go to ever again, the connection with their coach's life, and then just in general getting a different experience, seeing a different part of the country than they've ever seen. I think there's value in that. So I just wanted to say that before we kind of slip past it. Because I do think it matters. And you add it to, the Maui trips and playing on aircraft carriers and going on an overseas trip to Spain.
Champions Classic,
all of the Champions Classic. So that's more of a basketball thing. But I just mean all these elements around the program to get opportunities like this for experiential things is really unique. There aren't many places that do it the way Michigan State does it, where they emphasize this kind of stuff. And I think that's great, and I think it's worth commenting about. It's something I would think that all Michigan State fans should take a little bit of pride in.
Yeah. And just as a little bit of background, we've had Mike Garland, who is a now retired assistant coach under Tom Izzo, former teammate. So he played at Northern Michigan as well. So it'll be sort of return home for him as well.
Yep.
I imagine he'll be traveling. I can't imagine he wouldn't be with the team.
You would think.
Heading
Yeah,
back to
you would
Marquette.
think.
Yeah, as long as his health is
Yeah.
okay. All right. So let's talk about I think they're Huskies, right? Before
The Wildcats.
Wildcats, okay.
The Huskies are Michigan Tech, I believe.
Michigan
right?
Tech. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. My wrong UP team. So the Northern Michigan, they actually were really good last year. Their D2 program, as you mentioned, they play in the GLIAC. That's with Ferris State, which you actually Michigan State will be playing at their sort of regular exhibition game back at the Breslin Center. They went 22-11 last year. They were 14-4 in the conference. They won the conference, which I think is pretty unusual. They don't usually win the conference.
No,
usually.
Ferris has been
Yeah.
the powerhouse program in
Ferris
recent years.
or Grand Valley seem like they've been sort of the teams that have been the best teams. But they ended up losing the first round of the NCAA tournament to Ferris State, and which is funny because they beat them twice in the regular season. And the Wildcats are, they're going to be hosting a home game. I imagine there would be more Michigan State fans than Northern Michigan fans up there, but it'd be a pretty cool environment overall in the dome in a sort of non-basketball venue. I think it seats over 5,000, which is why they're moving to that venue, which, just giving it per comparison, what is it? Breslin's like 16,000, I think, or close to
15,
maybe
15.
15, yeah, a little under 15,000 maybe. So
Yep.
quite small compared to that. And of course you can't probably use all the seats, but anyway, so they'll be taking on Northern Michigan. I don't think there's much more to talk about with that. So we should probably just get into, the team.
Just briefly, as you mentioned, they haven't had the kind of consistent success that some other program, Ferris State in particular, over the last 5-6 years has been the powerhouse in that league. There's no two ways about it.
Football too.
They are. Yeah, that goes back, I think, even longer. But their basketball program has really gotten it done. And Michigan State has faced Ferris State teams that were competitive in exhibitions against MSU. So we know that that's a real thing. So for Northern to win the regular season title was a heck of an accomplishment. But they kind of faded late. And then that ended up showing up. They only got to the semifinals of the GLIAC postseason tournament. And then they lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament to Ferris, which, again, having to try and beat a team for a third straight time is a tough thing to do. And they found it was too difficult. So kind of a late season slide, but a hell of a year for Northern. And so that's what they're coming off of. But there's pretty, as we're going to talk about, the portal has not brought radical change from year to year only to Division I.
Oh, right. It changes everything. Yeah, we'll go through that in just a second here. Yeah, so we can almost talk about this like a previews we've been doing, but we'll just start with just mentioning that their leading scorer and the player of the year for the GLIAC, Max Wiesbrod, left the team. He transferred to Northern Iowa, which is in the Missouri Valley, so that's obviously a D1 school. So like you mentioned, the transfer portal hits everybody, no matter where you are, which is great opportunity for these kids, so that they get an opportunity to move up to a different level, and that's when you can certainly get a lot more exposure too. So they lost their third and fourth leading scorers.
Also to the portal.
Also the portal, yeah.
They're brought in not to D1.
Right,
as best
outside
as I
to other
could tell.
schools.
But it's just, it goes to, and here's the thing that's got to be particularly heartbreaking for Northern is all of those guys had eligibility remaining. Yeah. They were set to be bringing back, I believe, all their starters from a team that won the league, and instead they lose 60% of the starting lineup. So it's an illustration of something that goes even beyond what we spend a lot of time talking about. It's not even just D1. It's D2. Well, that you see a program get hammered. You can't blame the one kid for transferring up to Northern Iowa, but I'm not sure if the other two guys, I tried to dig around and find out if they had also transferred to D1 programs, but I couldn't find that information. So that might or might not have happened.
Yeah, it's hard to know. And it is very much for them. It's like being a AAA team. Like you could be the Mud Hens, have a great team, but your good players are going to get called up, and then suddenly your roster is decimated. I mean, similar situation. It doesn't have midseason, I guess, but that's otherwise.
And one more point on this, one thing that definitely has started to happen, and I think we've touched on this subject in a couple of the team previews that we've done for the Big Ten, is if you think back to when Duncan Robinson transferred from D3 Williams College to Michigan, which is not that long ago. Yeah. That's like less than a decade ago. That was a shocker. Like, you just didn't see that stuff happen, and he ended up having a pretty good run at Michigan, has made a lot of money in the NBA. And since then, I think floodgates opening is probably a little strong, but you see it with much more frequency. And of course, the portal has only aided and abetted it as well.
Right.
But you are now in a situation where D1 schools very clearly are going to look, if you are an exceptional player, if you are like the kid who Northern's leading scorer, if you are that level of player at D2, and particularly if you played for a successful team, D1 programs are going to believe that you can handle it. You might not be a star at the D1 level, but you can play. And you can be part of the rotation, maybe even start. And so that's what you see. And it's only going to continue happening. And the farm club analogy is an apt one, unfortunately, for D2 programs. It used to be, if they got lucky, I mean, think about it. Two of the biggest stars of the 80s and 90s in the NBA were Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman. Neither of those two guys played D1 basketball. That probably, it's a long shot that we'll see that happen again anytime soon. Because if you're that good,
they'll find you.
A D1 program's going to find you. Yeah. So it's unfortunate for the GLIAC type programs, but it's just, again, part of the reality of modern college athletics.
Yeah, it's sort of akin to, look at these teams and these mid-majors, and they have a successful season. The coach is gone. That's just sort of the way it goes. Have a run to go to the Sweet 16, and that's just that was your shot.
Look at this example. So, Weisbrod transfers to Northern Iowa. So, a mid-major D1 program is parasitical, acting as a parasite to the D2 program, right? But we also know that Northern Iowa is likely going to lose guys to high majors at some point if they haven't already.
Yeah. They're good ones,
We definitely have seen multiple players make an impact from that league in the Big Ten over the last couple of years. So it just kind of, there's this trickle up. And again, I don't mean this to be too cynical, because the fact of the matter is, it is a good thing overall for these kids to be able to get that opportunity, that they can be seen more readily. Even if they're not going to be an NBA player, that they just have the chance to experience what it's like to play at a major program. I think Frankie Fiddler at Zapala are going to find that out this year. Tyson Walker found it out, like what it's like when you go from even a smaller level D1 to a Michigan State. It's a whole other world. So you can't, it's great for the kids that they get those opportunities. It's unfortunate for the programs, but this is how it is.
Just the way it works, yeah. So, let's begin to talk about the players for Northern Michigan, brought to you by the Brothers Jesu Gutters. Friends, it is winter. Or sorry, not winter. Goodness, not yet. Let's start to feel more like fall.
It's only the 60s. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah, right. Which is, it could be the 30s before you know it. But those trees still have leaves, but they're going to start hitting your gutters pretty soon. If you need your gutters cleaned out, the Brothers Jesu Gutters, guess what? They just do gutters. So they can clean them out for you. Maybe you want to get some leaf guards put on so you don't have to clean them out yourself anymore, get up and down that ladder. Contact the brothers. They'll take care of it. They can also replace leaky parts or fix them. Whatever you need done, whether it's your house, whether it's your business, the Brothers Jesu Gutters should be your first call in order to get those things fixed. They did a great job. My house, they worked They did some great work in my wife's office. So anyway, you can't go wrong by the brothers. Great pricing. Listeners of the show get 10% off their estimate. You can find them at our support page at thefinalfoursnottheschedule.com/support. There you can click for an estimate for either the west side or the east side of the state. They got most of the state covered as long as you're in the lower peninsula, although we were talking about the upper peninsula. Sorry, guys. You'll have to find your own gutter guys. But for those that's down the south part, you can contact the Brothers Just Do Gutters, and they'll sponsor a player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutters. So begin with their players. Dylan Kuhl, 6'6" junior forward, second on the team in scoring last season at a little under 16 points a game, shot 50, 27, and 70. Although he was a much better shooter from three as a freshman at 40%. And so he's probably, as far as we can tell, probably their number one option on the team.
Yeah, also averaged almost 6 rebounds a game, and he's already been a 2-time all-conference defensive team member.
Not bad.
Your second leading scorer last year, your top returning scorer, top returning rebounder, I believe, and he could play defense. That seems to add up to a nice player. So he's someone I'm really interested to see it. It depends how they go with their lineup, and we really have no way of knowing what they're going to do. It's possible that he could be playing the 4, which would be an interesting matchup with Xavier Booker, to say the least. But I would really like to see some time with him dealing with Frankie Fiddler and vice versa, because I think he's capable of giving Frankie a good early test. Physically at least, he's a good matchup at 6'6", and he's about 210, so he's pretty well put together. Obviously, they're going to hope that his long-range shooting comes back around to where it was as a freshman. If it does, he's probably looking at, All-American status, because it seems he does everything else exceptionally well. So he's definitely, he's the guy on this team.
Probably safe to say he gets up to 40%. He won't be on Northern Michigan next season if he doesn't want to.
Well, it's right. He's got one more year he could play. So, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, and of course, anytime you go up against a team like Northern Michigan, you generally, especially if Michigan State has a size difference, and so it makes it complicated to play them too at times, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Absolutely.
But, next will be Brian Parrish, 6'1" senior guard, started most of the season last year. He averaged 10.5 points a game on 41, 29, and 76 shooting with a little over 3 assists a game.
Yeah, and so he's, again, it's hard to know. There's just not a lot of information as to where he'll slot in, but he's clearly going to be a starter because he's a returning starter and a double-digit scorer. But I mean in terms of whether he'll be mostly on the ball or kind of in a combo role. Last year, he was second on the team in assists. I think the issue here, again, another player that they would like to see that deep shooting number tick up a little bit.
Then we get to come to big man Sam Privet, 6'9", 230. He's a junior, averaged 5.8 points a game, 2.9 rebounds a game, shot 62% from the floor, playing in every game.
Yeah, and I think he's someone who's likely to see his role expand. You would think this team roster does not have a lot of size. He's somebody who played a lot, was the most productive of the big men, the bigger players they had, played a lot. So I would expect that he will be a starter. So he'll be a guy that, Zapala and Cooper and Jackson Kohler will be matched up with.
And the last player with some size is Jackson Dudek, 6'7", 230-pound junior, averaged 2 points a game in 25 games played.
I would assume he's set to play a bigger role just because, as you mentioned, at 230 pounds, even though he's only 6'7", you could probably get away with even having him maybe play some post minutes, some 5 minutes.
Sure. Yeah.
At the GLIAC level, but definitely at the 4. So I would think he, too, is going to see an expansion in his role.
Brandon Trilley, 6'5", sophomore, averaged 1.6 points a game in 25 games.
Ditto here. They got a lot of minutes to replace. And so these are the guys who were at least mostly in the rotation last year, even if it was in a limited way. So you would expect that they will step up. The hard part is that you really can't, at least I can't, accurately predict which freshman might be able to have an early role, because a program like Northern is not getting highly rated recruits. So you don't necessarily know who's likely to step up. I'm sure that there will be young players who manage to do that, but we're doing the best we can in terms of sorting out who's likely to emerge. And I think it's these guys who at least played a good amount last year are likely to see their roles expand, you would think.
Yeah, Rod is our only scout for these scouting reports, so it's a little hard to get things figured out. So then we go to the transfers that came into the program. Derek Merwick, 6-foot transfer guard from Midland College, where he averaged 21 points a game on 50% from the floor.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any 3-point shooting numbers or whether Merrick is a 6-foot point guard or a 6-foot shooting guard. But that's a lot of points. That's a lot of points, and 50% from the floor overall is a pretty good number. So
yeah,
you would think he's set. That in a general sense, they had 3 transfer guards they brought in, and the sense I had is that they expect all of them to be in the rotation somewhere. And with Parzik being the only returning starter, you could see there could be 2 starting spots and then a reserve spot available, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and I assume that's Midland, Michigan, would be my hunch. But...
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not? Okay, well,
No.
I guess I shouldn't make assumptions like that. Next is Biggie Luster, who's 6'2", transferred from Clark University, where he averaged 11 points a game.
11 points a game over his 3-year career. And this is information coming straight from Northern's site. So I'm relying on that because these are not guys that it's easy to find more detailed information.
The beat reporters at Clark University didn't.
Right. But again, a guy who's been a 3-year, obviously a double-digit scorer over 3 years, suggests that he's had some success at that level.
And finally, Julian Smith, 6'2", transferred from Missouri Science and Technology, averaged double figures through his 4 years there. So this must be his COVID year. He almost averaged 20 points as a freshman.
Yeah, and he's been a big scorer his entire 4-year career there at Missouri S&T. As you mentioned, had a high of 19 points a game as a freshman. So all 3 of these guys, I would expect we're probably going to see them because they all come in as players with a lot of experience, and Northern staff obviously felt they needed to do something to offset all the portal losses they had. So you would anticipate that these are guys they're counting on to fill those roles to one extent or another.
I'm not sure where Missouri Science and Tech is, but it's got to be quite a culture change ending up in Marquette after his 4 years down in Missouri. Certainly it's climate change.
Different world, yeah.
All right, so it's pretty obvious, I think, but the player that Michigan needs to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the Brothers Justy Gutters, would be?
Oh, it's very obvious.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Dylan
there's just he's a proven player for their team. He seems to do everything well. So, a pretty obvious choice.
Well, this will not count. This will be an exhibition for you and I before the season starts, but we'll start just our practice here for the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They sponsored the player that will clean the glass best for Michigan State. So we'll have to pick who we think is Michigan State will have the highest rebounds for their team. The Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids is an excellent choice. I've used it myself. They can take care of any sort of window cleaning process, whether it's inside, outside. They can power wash your house, but not just your house. They can take care of your business, high rise. They've even washed the windows of the Capitol building in Lansing. So they are not just in Grand Rapids, they're in the Grand Rapids area. So make sure you reach out to Troy and his team. They can do a fantastic job. 15% off for listeners of the show if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find that at our contact page, support page at the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. So make sure you check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids so you can have nice, squeaky clean windows. All right, so who do you think is going to have, who's going to clean the glass best for Michigan State in the exhibition game against Northern Michigan?
Boy. This is, we had a couple of very popular names last year that we kind of cycled through. Whereas
we don't have any of them yet, do we?
Madi Sissoko was the most popular one early, and then Malik Hall started slotting into there. Well, those guys are gone. So it kind of back to open season. I am going to Boy, this is tough. I am going to go off the board a little bit, and I'm going to pick Frankie Fiddler.
Okay, it's an interesting pick.
Yeah,
Okay.
Frankie Fiddler was a good rebounder in his time at Omaha, and I was tempted to go with Xavier Booker, but with Book, I just haven't seen the consistency yet. And then you've got the three-headed monster at center, and it's just hard to know which of those guys is going to see, the lion's share of the minutes, if any of them do. So I'm going to go with Frankie.
Yeah, when you said you're going off the board, I thought you might be going Nick Sanders. I thought you were going to go way off the board.
I'm not going way off the board. Or one of the Walt twins from Oakham's. Yeah. No, I'm not going that far off.
I thought they'll probably see some time on the floor. I would imagine the whole bench will be emptied for this game.
You hope so.
I mean, boy, you sure hope so. Yeah, right, exactly. I think I'm going to go with. I think I'm going to go with Kohler. I kind of feel like this is going to be easier, but we'll see how much time he plays, and I think that may be more.
That's not a bad pick.
Reflective, yeah.
I think if Jackson sees minutes, look, he's a little unfairly maligned in this way because I still hear and see people talk about him as if he doesn't rebound. Well, defensive rebounding has been an issue, but he is by a considerable margin their best offensive rebounder. He was last year. By offensive rebounding rate, which is the best measure of that you're going to have, because it addresses how many rebounds they're getting in the minutes that they're on the floor. He's their best offensive rebounder. He has a knack for it. So he does need to get better on the defensive boards. But, to me, the only issue is playing time. And if it turns out that he's actually going to be a starter, which could happen, then and especially if he settles into playing, say, 20 minutes a night or somewhere close to that, he's a very reasonable pick. But the scary thing is that there's so many guys who it could be on any given night.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Booker can just kind of exist and get 7 or 8 rebounds if he plays enough minutes.
Right.
I mean, that's entirely possible. So, Cohen Carr could emerge, but I think Kohler's a reasonable pick.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a wide open season, at least for the first 10 to 15 games until we get in some sort of rhythm and get a feel for minutes and rotations, right?
I was going to say, it's you and I are going to be kind of casting about looking for a trend, looking for patterns early, because there aren't obvious ones that leap out at you right now.
No, I mean, so folks, this is exhibition for Rod and I. We're just going to kind of
we're just warming up.
We're just warming up here, early October. So let's move on to the keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you need your Spartan apparel, they've got cool hats, they've got great t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips, full zips, sweatshirts. I have most of those things, and they are fantastic. They're the favorites of my family. I'd highly recommend you check out Nudge Printing when you're looking to get new Spartan apparel. If you like the old vintage logos or you like the new stuff, they got everything there. And Gabe and Brittany do a fantastic job, all produced here in the state of Michigan. So you can't go wrong with their high-quality screen-printed apparel. They sustained lots of washes, and they look just as great after multiple washes. You get 20% off, too, as a listener of the show if you type in Final Four just as one word. And, again, check out their hats. They're brand-new custom hats that Gabe's been working on. He does a fantastic job with his graphic design. And so, anyway, they're really, really cool. And so I'd highly recommend you check out at nudgeprinting.com. And so the keys to the game, number one, the most obvious, when it comes to exhibition, then the most obvious and most important one is health.
Yeah, and Michigan State's already had a little bit of a situation. Doesn't sound like too serious, but Garrick Norman, I think, had a knee issue, which has kept him out of practice for a little while. They fully anticipate he'll be back definitely by the time the real games start, maybe even by the time of that second exhibition, but I don't anticipate we're going to see him play in this one. So that's unfortunate for him. It's at least based on what we think, it's probably the one Michigan State could afford the most,
Right.
If somebody
He's
were
expected
to
to play
hurt.
the least minutes.
Right, for now. I mean, there's a long way to go,
yeah.
but what we think we know coming out of Spain. But look, she said the biggest thing here is that you don't see anybody else sustain something in an exhibition game. Right? You can't have it at any time, but you really don't want to see it here.
Yeah. And so the next key to the game is one that I think this is, and a lot of these kind of go along with just general trends for the year. And so the next one is transition. And so what this transition game looks like, we saw it in Spain, but I guess we'll
sure.
see how much it looks, how different it looks, I guess, now versus even 2 months ago.
Yeah. And we did see Michigan State really looking to run. Now, the games they were playing in Spain, those teams were not scouting
variable.
Michigan State. They're variable too, but I'm just saying in terms of preparation. So that means they weren't necessarily looking to really lock down and limit Michigan State's opportunities to get into the break. But we know that can be true in the non-conference as well. So I think the important things for me was seeing the focus on it, and in particular, the point guards.
Yep.
Because it really is on them. And Jeremy Fears, I've said it from the moment he got to campus, this is a guy who every possession is looking to get into a 94-foot game. And that's what you want. I liked some of what we saw from Jace Richardson in that regard, too. Mm-hmm. It's something I think Trey Holloman still has to work to get better at. I think it's just he's not as consistent with it as the other two guys in my observation.
Yeah, he looks to run as opposed to always looking to run.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of putting it. And it's one of my few criticisms of Trey because I love the way he plays. I love his heart. I love his emotion. I like his game. But that is something, and I'm saying that too because I mentioned Jace Richardson, but I think Trey Holloman's going to play more minutes on the ball than Jason's. Yeah. At least that's my expectation now.
Probably, yeah, right.
I think it was great to see Jace play as well as he did at the point. Wasn't a total shocker to me because I saw him do it in high school, but it was great to see it in Spain so that he can do the job. I'm very comfortable right now with the idea of him playing those minutes if they need him to. But I think they probably want to go with Trey Holloman as the backup, And so it's important. So he would be one guy. I want to see what his mentality is in this game in terms of getting into transition. You want to see the wings running the lanes. You want to see the bigs moving with a purpose. All the things that go into MSU's transition game. It starts with the point guards, but it surely doesn't end there. So all those things are important. That's what we want to see. And no better place to start than right here, right now.
So third key of the game is to getting the bigs going. That was the much maligned group last year at the 5 spot with Cooper and Kohler, and then also Sissoko, who's no longer with the team.
Yeah, and look, this is obvious. I'll stick to my guns. I do not believe Michigan State needs huge offensive contributions out of that position.
Right.
But would it be better for everybody if they're getting more than they did last year? Sure, of course. and I think there's a chance. I think there's a real chance for that. One, I think we saw in Spain, if Jackson Kohler stays healthy, we're going to see the best Jackson Kohler we've seen. I'm pretty comfortable in saying that. He looked confident. He was finishing better than we've seen. And yet he was also showing, really his perimeter game has been mostly rumor than fact over his first 2 years. We're told about it, but we haven't seen it cash in. He's proven to occasionally be able to hit a mid-range jumper, but you haven't seen him hit threes in games. You haven't seen him really get outside of, say, 12 feet. And we saw him do some of that in Spain. So
right, that
would be really encouraging. And yet I think, his bread and butter is going to be around the rim. And I was really, I'm not going to say it was, oh my God, this guy's heading for an all Big Ten season, but I was pretty impressed, particularly the last 2 games by Zapala. I was really impressed with the way he moved.
Yeah,
Is that
surprising. I think we didn't expect
much
him to move
more
that fast.
athletic than we thought. And he's active. He works. So that can produce some things if you're his size. So I think there's a chance there. And then, we didn't really see any signs in Spain that Carson Cooper's offensive game has taken a great leap forward. But I will say this. One way that we can get more out of him offensively with this team, and I think it's very possible that it happens, is if he's playing with a point guard, particularly Jeremy Fears, who just has a better link with him in the pick and dive game, so to speak.
Yeah.
Putting the ball on the money, that was not something A.J. Hoggard really excelled in my opinion. And Jeremy Fears is better at it. I'm already convinced of that. But if he can make it a little easier on Carson, look, two of those a night is the difference between, him scoring 8 points and 4 points. Do I think that's possible? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's possible. So we will see what happens with the 5 spot. You're not likely to have somebody who reminds you of Nick Ward or Zach Randolph. That's not going to happen. But can it be better? I think the potential is there for it. No better time to start again than in the first game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing Cooper has shown a really good ability to do is to run down the center like the 5 is supposed to.
Absolutely.
On transition.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
Hoggard occasionally hit him, but again, with someone pushing as much as you expect Michigan State this year, there's going to be a lot more opportunities, I think, for Cooper. So
that's why
we'll
it's really important for those centers to rim run. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something that Michigan State has not gotten as much out of in the last couple of years as traditionally they do. Either finding them in those or even on second chance opportunities, like somebody missing a layup or a transition jumper and just cleaning up by virtue of you having gotten down the floor and beaten your man to the spot. Yeah,
and briefly too, Zapala. I think the one thing in the videos we saw the highlight videos before when he committed to Michigan State, I don't think that the team played in a manner that Michigan State did. So I don't think it had an opportunity to sort of highlight his ability to move up and down the floor as much as we saw in Spain.
I think that is a really good point. And, it's one of the things that's interesting about the portal world is you do have to think about how they're being utilized in one place versus another. Mm-hmm. And I think you're absolutely right. Like my expectation for him was, okay, he's another big body, maybe he can give them some spot minutes and lengthen the rotation a little bit so they don't have to ask too much of Jackson and Carson. But I did not expect athleticism. I did not expect the motor that we saw. And you're right. That could sometimes, those surprises can mostly be a function of just being asked to do different things. Izzo sounds very optimistic about him post-Spain. And he's talked about him potentially as a starter. So you can't rule that out, which I never would have believed was in the cards when he signed, when he committed.
No, I don't think any of you thought that.
But having seen him play 3 games in Spain, I can't say that would be the wrong call.
It's going to be there's going to be a lot of competition for that starting role at the 5 this season. I think there's no question. You have a couple bad bum games or something, or you don't come out and, firing you're going to be out, if you're not playing full cylinders.
Yeah, I suspect you're right.
Yeah, right. You can get subbed out in 2 minutes in the game if it looks like you're not bringing it. So then the fourth key to the game is the rotations. It's always a little bit weird. Again, we're playing a team that's generally pretty small, so rotations can be a little bit weird. Also, as an exhibition game, and the fact that they're probably going to clear the bench, assuming that it's not like a close game, you expect that there's going to be a lot of weird sort of combinations on the floors, and Izzo just sort of experimenting to see who can run, or I suppose how things have been play in practice.
That's probably a reasonable expectation. I really don't mean this. I had said in the notes, these aren't just strictly keys the way we normally talk about.
Right.
They're things to watch for. And you might be right that that's what we end up seeing, but I'm going to be interested. I do think it's giving you the first real data points, because Spain was very definitely a situation where he was clearly trying out different combinations. He was making sure it wasn't that the minutes were equitable across the board, so everybody was playing the same, but it was a lot closer to that than you would expect in the regular season, and he's trying to find combinations that are going to work and what have you. Now, that's all entirely possible that we continue to see that in these exhibition games, because traditionally I think we do see some of that, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, though. I still think there's something to be gleaned. For example, we just talked about the 5 spot. Well, who starts this game probably tells us a little bit about Izzo's state of mind about the position as of Sunday, at least. Doesn't mean it's going to mean anything even in November, but it tells us where he's at right now. I think the other spots, the other 4 starting spots, are pretty defined. I think it's going to be Booker at the 4, and then you're going to have a perimeter group of Fears and Fiddler and Akins. That's your starting 5, the 4 of the 5, and it remains to be seen who the 5 man is that joins them. But then I want to see, so for example, when Booker's not at the 4, who's playing there? Mm-hmm. Is it Kohler, or is it Kohler, or is it Carr, or is it Fiddler? Because I think, I've seen people talking about this already a little bit. I think it's way ahead of the curve, but it's worth thinking about. Could we get to a point that we see Michigan State at closing time, say the last 3 minutes, 4 minutes of a game, maybe utilize a lineup where Frankie Fiddler is playing the 4, and you have a perimeter group of, Fears and Akins and Holloman. Or maybe Jace Richardson or Kurt Tang gets in there, depending upon the way they're playing. Yeah, very possibly you could see that. At Booker as a 5 with that group. If they feel like that's their best offensive group, and at the same time gives them flexibility on offense to close games out, you could see that. So I'm interested in those kind of things. I'm interested to see where those 2 freshman guards are in the rotation, how quickly they're getting to the floor, and how many minutes they're playing. Again, we're not going to be able to tell everything from this, but it's the first at least semi-meaningful data point that we're going to have. And I happen to think both of those guys look ready to go. So I want to see what exactly that's translating to, at least early on. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot to be observed, And
I think the thing you didn't mention that is also Cohen Carr and where he is and what
is he a 4 or 3?
Is he playing the 3? Is he
absolutely?
And is he in a late game situation? These are things we probably don't know at this point. But
absolutely.
Boy, I tell you what, he looked real impressive a couple of those games in Spain. Quite a leap with what he was. The impact he had in the game was impressive.
The two his offensive contributions kind of waxed and waned. He had one really big game, but the things that were pretty consistent, in my opinion, were his energy level and his impact on defense. And those were 2 things that I think, to be honest, he struggled with a little bit as a freshman. Mm-hmm. I don't think he had yet figured out what it means to play really hard by MSU standards. Izzo talks about this all the time, and you have guys who have gone through the program. I think it was earlier this off season, I saw an interview with Jaren Jackson where he was talking about that, how he thought he knew what playing hard was, and he had no idea. When he got to Michigan State, he discovered he didn't know. And I think that's something that you hear most guys say they have to go through. And I think Cohen went through it, because I'm not saying he was lazy or anything. I just think he hadn't yet figured out, this is what I need to do. This is the motor I need to play with, the intensity I need to put on display every time out. And what I saw from him in Spain suggested that he's gotten the message. That alone is going to make him a more effective player, because if you combine that kind of motor with his physical tools, forget hitting threes or anything else, just that will make him more impactful, no question. And I really liked what we saw from him in those games defensively.
Yeah.
So, he's another one. Absolutely. The role that he plays is going to be very interesting. Are they using him more at the 4, or is he still primarily a 3? And then if it's the 3, how is that impacting the freshmen.
Yeah.
How many minutes are still left for them, Because that's the thing. We know, we could feel reasonably certain going in that Frankie Fiddler and Jaden Akins, in a perfect world, are at least high 20s guys.
Yeah.
In minutes played, right? So that's not
Probably
a ton.
Booker too. But
Well,
yeah,
I'm
maybe.
talking about specifically on the wing, though.
Oh, yeah.
So
right. Mhm.
what does that leave for Carr if he's a wing? Trey Holloman, is going to play a lot, both at the point and off the ball. And then you've got two freshmen who both look ready to play. So, But how many minutes are there? So it all kind of, there's these domino impacts. And I think that's why I mentioned the rotations, because this is our first, Spain was Spain. You couldn't really take too much away from that in terms of how the rotation's going to look. But I think this game is at least going to give us a little bit of a hint.
I think the secondary title for this show would be Spain is Spain and the UP is the UP. We'll see.
Right. That's right.
So the fifth key to the game is playing sharp basketball. I mean, I think it's fairly evident, you don't want to look like you don't belong, like you have not. I mean, they've been practicing for a bunch. They should look sharp. They should come out with some intensity. And I think with the sort of, especially with the atmosphere and the way it's going to be with Izzo with his retiring his jersey, I think that is going to help sharpen their focus. That'd be my hunch.
One of the things that people often talk about when you've had the benefit of taking an overseas trip in the summer is that usually, and it's not a lock that it works out that way, but usually it means that when you start the season in November, you're ahead of the curve relative to most of the opponents you're going to be facing. Because not only did you have those games, but you had additional practice time that goes along with it. And it really is. It's a thing. You see this, again, not 100% of the time, but frequently. You will see teams who take an overseas trip start the year playing a little more sharply. I'll give you a Michigan State example specifically. The last time MSU took one of these trips was before the 15-16 season. That was Denzel Valentine, Bryn Forbes, Matt Costello, that group.
Yeah.
That team, we're used to Michigan State teams finding themselves in November, losing some games, people, engaging in their annual bout of amnesia and forgetting that this is how it goes. And they
not going to make the tournament this year. I can feel it for sure.
Yeah, they get angry, and then eventually Michigan State figures it out. But that season was an exception. That was, I can only think of one other year. That was the 2000-2001 team. So the year after the national title. Those are the only two teams I've seen at Michigan State that when games started in November, they were locked in and playing sharp basketball, and they were winning those games. The games against the Kansases and North Carolinas and people like that.
Right.
That we're used to seeing them lose to some extent, with some frequency in November. It will be interesting to me to see if this team follows suit. This team lacks an element that those two teams had in their favor, which is those two teams were, two things. One, both of them were coming off Final Four bids, but two, they also had a ton of experience. Like those were both senior-led teams that had, the 2000-2001 team, that senior class set a Michigan State record for the most wins by any class in history.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys went to 3 Final Fours and won 4 they didn't know what it was to not win a Big Ten championship. The 15-16 team was coming off of kind of a surprise Final Four, but the year prior to that, when they were sophomores, everybody thought they should go and maybe win the whole thing, and they got beat by UConn in the Elite Eight. And the year before that, when they were freshmen, they were a Sweet 16 team that was, highly ranked all year. So this team doesn't have quite that level of track record of success among its veterans, and it doesn't have as many veterans. I mean, I think Frankie Fiddler is going to be one of their most important players, and I think Jaden Akins will be too, but you can't say those guys are where Denzel Valentine was or where Charlie Bell and Andre Hudson were. It's a little bit of a different thing. But all that said, I still think it's a reasonable expectation to have that this team is going to be sharper than what we normally see from a Michigan State team early on. That doesn't necessarily mean much for how it ends up, but it should mean you don't see quite the same level of mistakes and learning going on early in the season. The exhibition game is, again, it's going to give us an early glimpse of that.
All right, we're going to wrap it up there. Michigan State will open the season, exhibition season anyway, on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock in Marquette. We will be back after that to talk about the game and give a post-game analysis, and then back into the previews for the number 3 team in Rod's Big Ten predictions, and we'll kind of work our way through. We'll get to the big deep dive for Michigan State. Then we'll have pretty soon we're going to have we'll start going through the games. We'll have the Ferris State pregame and postgame. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.